Um, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to UCT, or the Baxter for those from UCT, and to UCT, those from outside. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you here to this event, the first event, and I'll take you through some of the kind of preliminary kind of issues, but I'm not going to waste much time because we have to be out here of this hall by 7:30. So tonight we gather to talk about a topic that's been in the public domain for a while now. It's the issue of transformation. And we're hoping that we'll have, this is a series, we'll have more of this. The idea for a forum of this kind was triggered by Sakhela Buhlungu's public criticism of UCT. Now, Sakhela Buhlungu is a professor here in our sociology department in the Faculty of Humanities. And he started, he has a column in one of the papers, and he started this kind of discussion, this dialogue, this debate. The first shot was, of course, a criticism of UCT, and he had one very sharp statistic, that UCT does not have a single black female full professor. That was the statistic that kind of focused the mind. And then, of course, the debate extended and expanded from that point onwards. Of course, the problem about the debate, it's good to have the debate. The problem is that most of it has been conducted in the pages of newspapers, national newspapers. And of course, debates of that kind are never sustained. You lose some of the trends, you lose some of the strands in the discussions, and we're never able to pin them down. And hence we thought the best thing is to have this as a platform where we talk about these things, we put them on the table. And where possible, those who attend and those who participate can then take them forward. So that's what we're trying to do here. And this is the first, and hopefully there'll be more in the new year. And we were very fortunate to secure the partnership of the Sunday Times, where much of the exchanges have been taking place on transformation. These days you can rest assured every Sunday there's going to be an item, there's going to be an article in the Sunday Times and sometimes in the newspaper City Press. So we're very pleased that the Sunday Times has come on board with us. Especially we're grateful to one of our alumni, Felicia Oppelt, the editor of the Sunday Times, for seeing this gap and kind of agreeing to co-host this with us. We're kicking this discussion off with a high-profile panel. You'll agree with me, three of the leading kind of university leaders in the country and from three leading universities in the country. And in the future, we're hoping to bring it down to the ranks of academics, to the ranks of students, to the rank of other staff in the university. And so we might have different sector kind of discussions in the future. And of course, we're very pleased and we're delighted to welcome other people from outside of UCT. This is not a UCT debate. It's a national debate, it's a big debate, and so we're happy to welcome other people. And from time to time, we will try and invite people, speakers, and other members of the audience from outside. When I approached the three panelists, I approached them because I'm confident that each one of them has got something to say on this subject. I also know that they come from different backgrounds, they have different experiences of transformation. And so tonight I'm hoping that they'll present not only their opinions, but also they'll share with us some of their experiences of transformation in the institutions where they've worked. Now, just to introduce them very briefly, and it will be flashing their bios there, just so I don't bore you with long introductions. Just to introduce them very briefly. Dr. Max Price needs no introduction. He is the Vice-Chancellor of UCT and has been in that position since 2008. And before that, he had university experience elsewhere, principally at Wits University in Johannesburg. Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, or Gethi, is the Vice Principal at UNISA. And once again, she's worked at UNISA since 2008. Before then, she was at Wits University, and many will know her for her leadership of a center, a mathematics center called Marang Center at Wits, back before she moved on to UNISA. And then finally, we have Professor Jonathan Jansen, and I learned that at Free State they just call him JJ for just to save time. JJ is also well-known, he needs no introduction. He is the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Free State, and having started there, and now let me get it right, Jonathan, 2009. 2009 he started there, right? And he kind of walked straight into a kind of minefield at the time, as many of you will remember. But he has managed to weather many a storm at University of the Free State. And before that, he was at the University of Free State, and not Free State, rather Pretoria. I just want to say, before I move on to the quick questions here, there's something that the three people on stage and perhaps myself share in common. There was one brief moment, it could have been a year, where all four of us were in one institution. At that time, Max Price was the Dean of Health Sciences at Wits. Gethi was the head of Marang Center. Jonathan was a visiting professor in the School of Education at Wits, right? 2007, 2008. And I was a kind of an ordinary member of the academic staff at Wits. So there's that bond, and so we will differ, but also we know one another a little bit. So the question, what are the questions here? The panelists have an open brief. They will address these questions from where they come from, and they have strong views about them. But just to set the scene, the questions about transformations are many and varied. What is transformation? What is it not? How do we map out the field of transformation? How do we get there? Is it desirable for an institution to have external intervention in its transformation if it's deemed not to be making progress? Those are some of the questions that have come to the fore. How do universities grow the pool of black academics? And many other questions. What are the dilemmas about transformation? This, at UCT, this is a big issue now. In recent weeks, a group of 19 academics kind of went public in response to Dr. Price, to an article that Dr. Price wrote in the Sunday Times earlier in the year. So this thing has now become very public, and it's actually quite timely that we're now having this discussion here. I just want to, having said that, I just want to then conclude, and before I invite the speakers onto the podium, the two quotes that hopefully will focus the mind. And of course, Xolela Mangco is not here to participate in this. He started the trouble, and then he's now at Harvard University as a visiting kind of professor there. But just 2 days ago on Sunday, he wrote a piece in City Press, and I'll quote one sentence from it. He says, "We need a national union of black academics, particularly at white liberal universities." That was Xolela. And of course, another prominent member, academic, a black academic, took up this issue. And he said, and he is in the house, but I will not name him until he reveals himself. And he says, picking up on Mangco's, he says, the struggle over universities is not only at liberal universities. It occurs at formerly Afrikaans universities. It is taking place at former Bantustan universities. It can be found at historically black universities more generally. It is, in fact, encountered in South African universities because it is a question about what is a South African university and what is the purpose of such an institution. And then he goes on prominently, for me, he says, I support Mbango's call. One task of our generation of academics is to effect a radical program of free knowledge. We are called to realize that what it means to work and live as free black scholars. We have to challenge the South African university in its current form because it continues to peddle white, colonialist, capitalist, heteropatriarchal knowledge. In that, we will be more than simply blacks for hire or researchers for money. Now, just to end on a note that this is it can be an emotive subject, but after all the emotions have come and gone, this is a practical subject. It is a subject that animates many people. And at UCT, it's actually timely for us to have this discussion now. I now invite Dr. Max Price to give his presentation, and I'll then invite them in turn to come and speak, and then we'll take it up from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I also, as I suppose, co-host of the function, want to welcome my colleagues from UNISA and Free State University to this event, to this discussion, to this conversation, because as has already been said in the last remarks of the Dean, this, in my view, is a national problem. It's a problem that affects all universities. And we need to tackle it together. And in the 20 minutes that I have, there's too much to talk about everything, so I've chosen to focus on the main question, which is, what is transformation in higher education? And I'm also going to limit it to, which I also understood sort of to be the format, to saying, how do I think UCT looks at transformation in the higher education sector? I'm not going to presume to talk for other universities, but clearly there must be massive overlap between all of us. The challenge in addressing a panel, or being part of a panel addressing this topic at this moment, is that it has, as the chair said, been triggered by a particular debate around the black professoriate and the paucity of black academics, particularly in senior positions. In the UCT context, that follows hot on the heels of the debate earlier this year around admissions policy, and a debate which we have been encouraging and following for the last 3 or 4 years, at least, on the admissions policy. And both of those, of course, are about representativity. And so it's very easy, firstly, for the discussion on transformation to take a narrow focus that is on representativity. And it's easy for it to become something about which one becomes defensive and responds in a way that makes excuses. And so to avoid both of those, I want to spend the first 10 minutes of my talk talking about the other aspects of transformation. So representativity, in my view, and I think in a UCT view, if I may be so bold as to say that, representativity is one element of transformation. And I think we do transformation a huge disservice if we answer the question, what is transformation in higher education, by focusing only on representativity. I will certainly come back to that. But representativity is one element of the internal aspects of transformation. In other words, transforming the university itself. But that is only half of what transformation is. Transformation is very much about transforming society. And I think the question is, what is the role of the university in transforming society? And I'm going to identify 8 areas that I think they don't exhaust the field, but they highlight what at UCT we would see as our transformative role. The first is simply to educate people. Students come out of often very poor backgrounds, out of homes that have not had education or that have been stuck in jobs that do not enable them because of lack of skill, competency, and training and education, to rise up the ladder, the income ladder, to engage with the world of literature, to engage with the world as active citizens, to engage as political beings, These are all the transformative effects of education, and we mustn't forget that that is probably where we have our maximum impact if we do it right. And I qualify by saying if we do it right, because it seems to me we do not achieve the goals of transformation if a lot of our students fail or drop out and don't complete their degrees. We do not achieve the goals of transformation if, having achieved a degree, they cannot get jobs, if their degrees are not valued by employers, or if they cannot start up their own businesses. And so one of the areas in which I think the whole sector should be paying much more attention in transformation is, are we achieving that goal? Are our students and graduates getting jobs? We hear a lot about graduate unemployment. We would be doing a huge disservice if, after creating significant indebtedness in families and individuals, they don't then have the rewards. And that is about a quality education. UCT, as part of the Western Cape Higher Education Consortium, did a graduate destination survey to find out how long does it take our graduates to get jobs. Do they get jobs? And fortunately, and as regards UCT, we find that about 95% of them who want to have jobs within 18 months. So, but that's, I think, a national project, and we would be failing if we didn't do that. It's not only about getting the curriculum right, it's about all of the other soft skills that go with being effective in the workplace: ethics, discipline, confidence, and also work experience. And I think the extension of curricula into internships and work experience is going to become part of that job. So that's the first. The second I want to focus on is the commitment to the success. It's linked to just the education process and the quality of it, but it's to ensure that most of those who start graduate. We all face challenges, but this is hugely resource intensive: the academic development programs, the appropriate placement of underprepared students, and I'm proud to say, as far as we can tell, UCT has very good, perhaps the best, success rates of these students in the country, because we, for many years, have been investing in this and continue to do so even more. Thirdly, I think our goal is to create not just people who get jobs, who pass and who get jobs, but transformational leaders. And so we need to wrap around the intramural curriculum things like leadership training, volunteerism, commitment to social justice issues in the curricula and extracurricular. Projects like the Global Citizenship and Leadership Project, which started as an optional project with a small group of students and is now spreading into engineering, into commerce, into many other curricula, into health sciences. Multilingualism is part of that as well. Exposure to inequality in society. It should not be possible for a student to spend 3 or 4 years at university coming out of a sheltered background, a middle-class background, not to be fully conscious and aware of the nature of inequality in society in South Africa, what it looks like, what its causes are, and how we might address it. And so all students should have some form of community service as part of their degree, and progressively I think we're introducing that. All information science students, most law students, all health science students, very many engineering students are now have the opportunity or are required to participate in those sorts of programs that give them that exposure. Fourthly, making our expertise as a university, this incredible resource that we have here, the brain power, the equipment, the technologies, making all of that available to answer the big questions, the big challenges that society faces. And as many of you know, from those of you from UCT will know, we have done so quite explicitly. We listed 5 big challenges: the school education system, poverty and inequality, climate change and development, safety and violence or crime, constitutionalism. And we said these are things which the university as a whole must address, not because of the accident of someone thinking that it's an interesting project or it coincides with their research interest, but because it's a duty as a university that wants to transform society to become involved and to allocate the resources to do that at a trans-institutional level. Next, fifthly, we need to be responsive as a research institution to the needs of communities. And so engaged scholarship is a major thrust of what we do. And we have now developed, I think, a system which we can be very proud of. We have, for example, the Knowledge Co-op, which is a portal and an office where community organizations, NGOs, schools can come with research projects. They get matched up with postgraduate students, honors students, and something like 200 projects have been completed in the last couple of years. But it's not just engaged scholarship by students, but by academics. The annual Engaged Scholarship or Social Responsiveness report reflects numerous areas of academics applying themselves to key problems. Pick up one from the Graduate School of Business, made aware of the fact that retail food outlets have set such high standards for the food that many small farmers can no longer compete, and the small farmers are going out of business. And so addressing that problem through an intervention that, driven by the retailers, that increases the ability and actually results in the survival and the flourishing of those farmers. That is engaged scholarship, which doesn't lead to publication. It's not pushing the edges of knowledge, perhaps, but it's something we need to do as a university because we're a transformative university. Sixthly, research in general. 90% of the new knowledge we create in our research programs is in response to real-world South African, continental, and global problems. Vaccines for TB, drugs for malaria, renewable energy policy, the first wind map of the country, which will enable the rapid growth of wind farms, traditional courts and understanding the legislation around that, land restitution, numerous projects, numerous research programs in every single faculty are addressing the challenges and the problems we face, pushing the envelope of knowledge, transforming society. Seventh is the role of the university in democratizing society. And here we have particularly the role of public intellectuals, which we have nourished, I believe. We have created some positions which are almost specifically created in order to perform the role of public intellectuals, and adapted a workload profile around those jobs that recognizes some of that work. We have tried to nurture in student government, in student leadership, and amongst faculty, and through the active stance that the university takes, whether it's marching to Parliament to protest the Protection of Information Bill, whether it's protesting and campaigning against crime in the townships, in various ways promoting the idea of active citizenship and of the role of the university as an institution that protects democracy and promotes it. All of this, there was an eighth, I think. Yeah, there's an eighth. Very briefly. Also an external factor, and I noticed someone very often I associate this hall with opera, and there's a couple of representatives from the opera school, and I was reminded that one of the ways in which I believe we transform the world externally is through changing the perceptions of people outside South Africa. And opera is a wonderful example of how we have found some of the best voices in the world, helped them train and nurture those talents, put them on the stages at La Scala and at the Met in New York, and are changing what the world thinks opera is, who it belongs to, is shifting it from being a genre which is European to a form of music that we all own, and that is as much a black art form as a white art form. That is transformative. So all of this is by conscious choice. These transformative activities that are externally oriented haven't happened by accident. There have been choices we've made about how we allocate our resources. We get no points in the rankings from the Knowledge Co-op or from the Schools Improvement Initiative. Our global reputation is scarcely influenced by the extensive policy work we do with government. The allocation to extension programs and academic development programs and extra tutors doesn't score us anything in any of the measures of global reputation. They're choices that we make and we want to play, because we want to play a role that maximizes our transformative role, that addresses poverty and inequality, that improves the quality of the students' degrees, and that the future we transform the future through the next generation of leaders, through research, and through confronting history and creating that future. Let me now turn to the internal transformation, transforming the university itself. And here the first dimension is access to students who were previously excluded. How do we do that? How do we change it so that the child driving into town from Mitchell's Plain sees the university on the hill and sees this as their birthright in the same way that the student from Bishops has always thought of coming to UCT as his birthright? We need to do that through, firstly, policy. We need to, and measuring what people think. So we do surveys now in the schools, in Khayelitsha and in the Cape Flats, to say, why do people think about UCT in the way they do, and what might change that? We do marketing. We send teams into the schools. We set up financial systems which ensure that any student we accept academically will be funded and will not be prevented from coming here for financial reasons. We adapt an admissions policy which we believe had pretty successfully achieved that sense of birthright or that sense of access for black students coming from Bishops and Westerford, but had not yet achieved that for students coming from disadvantaged township schools. And so we have changed the policy explicitly to say those are the schools and the kids from those schools that we want. So, and then we work in the schools themselves so that more students in the schools are able to compete and get into UCT. Once they're admitted, we need to ensure that through things like that their adjustment is supported through things like the first year experience, residences, integration, national benchmark tests, academic development. So students' access and success are the first internal form of transformation. Second, staff, employment equity. Now, this has been the big debate, and I think we'll come back to that in question time, so I won't spend, and I've written quite a lot about it, so I don't think I need to go into in detail, but in short, we think that at the junior levels, we're making progress. We can see higher proportions of recruits at lecturer, senior lecturer level. At the professorial level, it's still very, very small, but it's because it's a national problem. The numbers of black professors at universities are published, and we're somewhere in the middle of that. And we believe that it's because the pool of black professors, of people who are eligible to be appointed as black professors, is small. And that's a key external constraint over which we have little control. But there are things that we can do internally. We can firstly be vigilant in our selection committees. So for example, right now we are reviewing all the selection committees and all the applicants to those committees of the academic committees of the last 2 years to say, is it possible that there is a bias in the selection committee, or what is the extent of that bias that may have resulted in black candidates being overlooked at all levels? And so that will be an independent review. We talk to the employment equity reps from the committees and get feedback. We do surveys of people who resign from the university, black and white, to say to what extent is the resignation triggered by the institutional climate, that this is not a welcoming place. We attempt to accelerate career paths through we first have induction programs for new academics and accelerate the career paths through the Emerging Researchers Program. We have an employment equity fund which we will double next year, so that if we spot a talented or qualified black academic but don't yet have a job available, that we can offer them a job, not just black, also senior women academics, with extra funds when jobs don't yet exist. And in general, but as I say, we can still do more. I think what we have to do is to create a sense of urgency and priority. And in a sense, we're copying the strategy that we followed around the admissions policy. We need to talk about this a lot. It needs to be on everyone's minds. It needs to be written about in the newspapers. We need to receive submissions both from the public and from the community, the internal community. We need to create a sense of urgency amongst heads of departments and deans. We need to set key performance areas for heads of departments, not only about the appointments, because that we think is more constrained because of the external pool, but about building the pipeline, that they have targets for how many honors, masters, and PhD students they recruit. Perhaps where past efforts have failed, we need to also focus much more on mentoring. So that's in connection with staff as the second area. The third is the institutional climate itself. And this is a big issue, and also what something I think we've been conscious of for 5-6 years since I came here. And how have we tried to address that? Are you looking at me in time? Okay, so 1 minute, then I'll stop in 1 minute. Around institutional climate, we have, for example, and this is very complex, and we recognize that. And the idea, what we need is more ideas and how to do it better. These are the things we've tried and are doing. We've renamed lots of buildings because we recognize that the architecture of the place and the history says to people from different cultures and different language groups that maybe they don't belong here. So we have now the Mafeji room, we have the Duma Bakwa room, we have the Adil Murat, the Dalla Omar, the Neville Alexander, the AC Jordan, the Jack Simons, the Madiba Circle. In the last 3 or 4 years, we have made a significant effort to shape and the symbolism of the university. We have a so-called heritage trail, which is large plaques which give a critical view of the Rhodes statue, or the rugby grounds, or the Jamison Hall, and many parts of the university which are founded on colonial or imperial or other aspects of our history around which we should be uncomfortable, we should feel awkward. Those are all areas that we try to be critical of publicly. Multilingualism, multicultural competencies. We for 3 years ran the Kuluma program of retreats, multicultural competencies, and then the ADAPT program. Some 2,000 staff participated in these. Artworks and pictures, and for example, right now we're addressing the issue of the slave memorial. These are all efforts through the symbolism of the university to address the culture. Perhaps most importantly, what I feel about the university in terms of the climate and the culture is the openness of the debates, the race debates. We name race, we talk about it a lot in the newspapers, in these sorts of fora, the students talk about it, and I think that in itself is transformative. The letter that was referred to by the chair, by 19 academics, is a really thoughtful letter. And what I really enjoy about these debates at UCT, I think, this is how I feel about them, is that they do not attack the individuals. People are not playing the race card. They attack the ideas. They criticize the arguments. And that is an enormously healthy feature, and that itself is transformative. We address curricula, not enough, I think. We have introduced an ombud and disco because there was a concern that perhaps people just felt they might be victimized if they raised issues, these sorts of issues, and the ombud is a safe space where these can be addressed. So I think we are making progress, but what's clear to me every day when I talk to black students in particular and black staff is that there are two worlds. There's the world that I'm talking about where we think we're making progress, but there's clearly another world in which people are feeling disconnected, not included in the institution, and that generates a mistrust of the selection committees, of how the institution works. And I have no reason to doubt that those experiences are real, those experiences of alienation, of sometimes being invisible, and that we need to address that, and we need to do so by calling on everyone to participate in the debates. Sometimes we may be criticized that is passing the burden of transformation onto black students and staff. I think the other side of that is that whites cannot easily and should not speak for black students and staff, and so it is a debate that we all have to commit to participating in. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll proceed straight to Professor Phakeng's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sakhela, and thank you very much for the invitation. I woke up this morning at home and I thought, wow, I cannot believe that I accepted this invitation to go to UCT to talk about transformation, which is not my area of research or specialty, which I do because of who I am and the office that I occupy at the moment. And I thought, well, am I taking myself to the slaughter? And so, I prepared a PowerPoint deliberately because I thought if I walk into the hall and I see who's in the hall, I might just change what I say. So I did it firstly to make sure that I don't change what I say, what I want to say, that it's cemented, and it's even worse because I don't even have control of it. It's at the back, so I won't even have control to jump slides and so on. So this is self-control at its best. But I'm delighted to be here, and I've entitled my talk, Transformation in Higher Education, What Numbers Do Not Tell Us. And I deliberately did that because the debate, as it has been in the newspapers, has been about numbers. And I'm not sure if numbers are useful. I'm not sure if numbers tell us everything. And I think if we're going to talk about numbers, then we should also critique what numbers are we looking at. That's not to say numbers are not important. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if you see me doing things, it's because I'm talking to the guy at the back, right? And sometimes I might be telling him what to do. So we go to the next slide. So, transformation is not just about numbers, because counting the number of black or women professors, whilst this is important, it is not a sufficient measure of the progress that we have made in transformation. I mean, otherwise, counting the number of professors, in my view, tells us mainly about the promotion criteria in different universities. Because some people will be professors at VUT, and they will not be professors at University of Pretoria. And so if you know, I really don't think it tells us anything. You know, if one university has got more professors than the other, or more black professors than the other, doesn't necessarily mean the one is more transformed than the other. It just might say something about their promotions criteria. And so I think we should not just look at that. And I'm saying it's important because even though it's not everything, it is still important to see, well, but how are we doing on that front? It is a problem if that's the only thing we look at. The second thing that bothers me is the fact that we do not disaggregate the designated group. We talk about the designated group as one group of people, as if they have had the same experience of oppression, and so to deal with their past, we put them under the same law, and then we think that will transform. I think how we narrowly define the group matters, the group designated groups. Designated group, and I know that it's in the Employment Equity Act and so on. So some people hang on to it and argue to do certain things because of what it says. But my view is that the experiences of the oppressed were different. Experiences of a black South African woman or man or an Indian man or Indian or colored or white women are different. And so to put the white women with the black women in the same bracket, and it's sort of to assume that they experience oppression in the same way, and so their past can be dealt with in the same way. So think about it in this way. I mean, white women were educationally advantaged. They went to the same schools as the white men, as far as I know. Per capita expenditure was the same for them. Okay, they lived in the same areas. So there's difference from what a white woman my age, how they experienced oppression to a black woman who lived in a township or rural area. So I think we need to disaggregate because it's important that we do not ignore how privilege works. Okay, privilege works in different ways, and we should not ignore that. So, and to see how privilege works, if you look at 20 years after democracy, you look at different universities, you'll see that in some universities, transformation data shows an overrepresentation of white women. That's not because they are smarter than we are or they work harder than we do. No, I mean, they have the networks, they've had a different educational experience from what we've had. And I'm not here to bash anybody. I'm just saying that this is what it is. You know, whilst I was busy in a rural school in Marapiani, my white colleague was somewhere in Parktown. going to school there. So it's quite different. I have a lot to work off than they do. All right? We go to the next slide. So, if we're going to insist on counting, I want us to reflect on what is it that we are counting, or what it is that we are not counting, and why. All right? So, the last point that comes there, that came up there was supposed to be the last, but it's now the first. We're not going to start with it. Can you bring up the other 2 points? I wonder, why do people go for the number of professors? Why are we not counting the number of research outputs that are produced by black South Africans or women? Why don't we count that and then start asking questions why? If we're going to count, why are we not counting the number of black South Africans or women who have doctorates? If really we're going to count, why are we not checking how many black South Africans are NRF rated and why? And what levels are they and why? And if we're going to count, can we count how many hold Sachi chairs? Does that matter? For me, it matters. Because having a professor title is one thing. I mean, there are other things that are important in this business. And we are not counting. We are not paying attention to that. All right. And my last point there is that, can we have a subsidy system that rewards transformation rather than the number of research outputs produced? I mean, at the moment, what we have, the DHET, is that they count the number of outputs we've produced and they give us our money. And I want a system which recognizes that, which says, well, the government is serious about transformation and they're doing something about it, and so they're going to reward universities that are doing it, not in terms of how many people they're promoting, but how do universities improve on the number of black South African academics producing outputs? So we say, well, you've produced this number, 1,115, we give you the subsidy for that, and we've got a variable in our calculation that says, well, if 50% of them are black South African, this is what you get. I think that will make universities shake a bit. At the moment, it doesn't. I mean, the DHET doesn't care who produces the output. They're just happy about the outputs, really. Okay, so I really think if I were a minister, that's what I was going to do, actually. But that's not going to happen, we know that. So the DHET is not doing it. And so in my current position as Vice Principal Research, I thought, well, the DHET is not doing this. But it bothers me as Vice Principal Research and Innovation. And I'll show you what I'm doing at institutional level to take up that challenge. Because I think if we want to transform, genuine transformation that doesn't just count who becomes professor, that makes people achieve as researchers, then they will automatically become professors. Then we don't have to fight about who becomes professors. We fight about who you give opportunities, what opportunities are there, what kind of environment do you create for success, and then people will then be successful. So I want to get to the next slide, which says how are we taking up the challenge at UNISA, and I'm focusing on research there. I'm focusing on research specifically because it's my current portfolio. But also, we know that in academia, if you don't succeed in research, the chances of becoming a full professor are pretty slim. So what we've done at UNISA is that I've developed a model or a framework that defines levels of scholarship. And I did that because I was worried. I mean, I did that. This is my third year in this office. And I noticed that people are so obsessed with productivity, just getting the number of outputs, research outputs, just so that they can get the promotion, so that they can get, where we come from, we give the incentive as well, because otherwise people think without an incentive there's nothing. I don't believe that, but it happens. So then I developed this framework that defines levels of scholarship, and I'll show you the diagram just now, so that it helps us think about what are we driving here. Is our business only about the number of research outputs, or are we driving a much bigger agenda than that? All right. And then also we work with an understanding that there is no point in doing research if it has no influence. Research must have influence. And I'll talk about that when I show you the model. But then I said, well, without transformation, influence, even if you have influence, it is not sustainable. If you want to have influence that is sustainable, then transformation is a critical factor. And I'll show you the diagram just now. The third thing is that I did was to have a system where we have a reward system for academic entities that perform in transforming the cohort of researchers. So we have in our algorithm of distributing research funds to colleges or to faculties, as you call them here, there's a variable for transformation. All right, and this almost got me a petition when I changed the formula, okay? Came in, changed the formula for research allocation, and faculties wanted to fight because all they wanted to do was give us the money only based on what we produce, the number of outputs, because that's what you get from the DHET. My view is that that doesn't help, because what we want to do is to change behavior, to change how people do things. And so I thought we developed an algorithm that helps us to factor that. And the first year we had in one category black, women, and young. And then we realized, no, it doesn't work because, you know, the women graph always goes higher. Okay, so now we separated the three. Okay, so you must perform on black, you must perform on women, and then you must perform on young. And we use the Freedom Front definition of young, which is 45, right? All right, so. Okay, that's the model that I developed. Let me do this. So that's the model. And so the model starts with productivity. And productivity, I define it as the lowest level of scholarship. It's the lowest level of scholarship. That's not to say it's not important. It is important, but it's the lowest. It focuses on the number of publications. You know, we get DHET subsidy. That's how we earn our revenue, and people get promotion. And I'm sure you saw us in the newspaper. Some people play a bad game with that. They're going to these journals that are not reputable, where there's no review process, just to get, you know, because that's what productivity does. It asks no question. It just says, as long as you produce them, they're on our list, we'll give you the money. So we said, well, we've got to go to the next level. And the next level is transformation. And then we start asking questions about the outputs. What does the research that's published focus on? Whose questions are being explored? Who does the research? Who's producing the research? What is the percentage of researchers from designated groups that are producing the outputs? Okay, we start asking questions about the productivity. Okay, we probe into the productivity. And then we go to the next level of scholarship, and that's sustainability. How are we doing our research? Do we do it in a way that we can continue doing it for the foreseeable future? Do you have the capacity to do that? What percentage of young researchers is producing the outputs? Because we want it to be sustainable. Otherwise, people might retire and we don't know. Who is maintaining academia? I mean, if we don't think about that, we will have people in the pipeline and then they disappear. What plans do we have as a university to retain black academics? Okay, every faculty has to struggle with this. Can we retain what we have in terms of the black academics? How do we do that? Because if we're not careful, we can get them in, do all the work, and 7 years later they will go and elsewhere. Because everyone is looking for talent. Okay, let me tell you, if you have a black person in your department who's got a doctorate and knows what they're doing, in a month, they get about 5 calls that gives them big jobs. Am I wrong, Professor Mayusi? I'm right? Okay. You get a lot of calls from anywhere in the world offering. So you got to know that. So part of our strategy in terms of transformation is to make sure that you retain them. Not to you don't only work at getting them to the level of influence or of professorship or whatever you see as your measure, but to retain them. Then we talk about influence, and I talk about influence as the highest level of scholarship. And that's when I say, well, if you do research and it influences nothing, then what's the point? What's the point of doing research that doesn't influence anything? Okay, so we ask questions: how is the research influencing policy and practice? How is it addressing societal challenges? How is it contributing to economic, political, social, and cultural transformation? And how is it shaping knowledge of ourselves and our world? And how is it shaping the discipline? All right, so we ask all those kinds of questions. We want our faculties to think, or our colleges to think about these questions, because they are very important if we're going to transform. And the reason I'm saying, well, we can't have influence without sustainability. My view is that, without transformation, my view is that it makes a difference who you have in the game. You know, there are questions that I will ask that a white professor might not ask. There's an given who I am and where I come from, there are things that bug me more than they bug someone who grew up in a middle-class background. And so if we don't transform, I think we lose the benefit of having that other voice that brings in a strength in the research that we do. And so when I say transformation is important for influence, or influence without transformation is not sustainable, I really mean that. It might look good for the moment, but is it sustainable going into the future? And so I think we need to be thinking more about that. I still have time, Sabina. Next slide. So what we do then at UNISA is that to drive transformation and lead to influence, is that in our strategy, we set goals and targets that focus on the different levels of scholarship and not only on productivity. So we don't look only at this is how much we want to produce, or we've produced this much, wow, we've done great. Okay, we look at how, all those levels. And so we've introduced research development programs so that researchers from different levels can take up those opportunities and they can perform at the level. Because that's what we want to grow. We have introduced support programs that can help us grow the areas that we want to grow. I'm going to ask you, sir, at the back, that you click on the hyperlink. Can you do that? I'm just going to briefly just show you, give you a sense of what we have. Can you do that? There. That little arrow there. If you put your mouse there, yeah. Click OK, let's see. Just click OK and see. All right, that's fine. That's fine. The UCT computer is refusing. If you go to... It's not cooperative at all. Okay, this is what you do, right? If you click up to the last slide, you'll get that slide I'm talking about. But okay, stop. Let's just go on. Okay, what we do, I'll get you to this. I'll show you at the end. So the other thing that we're doing is that when we monitor our research performance, we monitor it beyond productivity. So I don't get excited about the fact that we've increased our research productivity by so much. And so it's important, but it doesn't tell me everything. And so I'm also excited about who is publishing, what's their race, what's their age, and what's their gender. So in our reporting, we put that up so that we can see each faculty has to do that too, right? Where are they publishing is also important. Who is NRF rated? We have a variable that gives a benefit to all those three things, right? For transformation, for where you publish, and for who's NRF rated. And then most importantly, and this is what makes faculties act and do all sorts of, and try to do all sorts of things to improve on transformation, is rewarding transformation. Okay, where I said you have a formula, you make sure that if you have more black professors, black academics producing outputs, then you get a benefit. Okay, so that makes them think, okay, you want more money, you're going to have to do something. Whether you do writing retreats, whatever you do. Okay, so it forces heads of departments and deans and leadership in faculties to think carefully about what is it that they do, how do they support their people, and how can they keep a black academic from leaving their faculty. Okay, go to the next one. Thank you. Go to the next one. Now you'll see the fantastic. There it is. There it is. Okay, just briefly. I'm not going to preach to you, right? Okay, just to give you a sense, the different programs. So I'm concerned about the number of people with doctorates. So we introduced, last year we started the implementation of our Academic Qualifications Improvement Program, and that's for people who don't have master's or doctoral degrees. We give them time out. If it's a master's, they get 2 years out to complete their master's. Doctoral, we give them 3 years out. We hire someone in their space. They go anywhere. We pay for them. They continue getting their salary, though, to complete their doctorate. And we give preference to black, young, and women. Okay. So as we're speaking right now, we've got a lot of black academics who are on AQUIP, we call it, and they are studying towards their doctorates. All right, this is very controversial because we say to a white 52-year-old, no, it is not for you. You've got to sit and work and complete your doctorate at the same time. MDSP is Masters and Doctoral Support Program. This is for people who, we encourage people to apply for Tutuka grants and so on. If they apply and they don't get successful, then they get into the MDSP. To get into the MDSP, they've got to show evidence that they applied and were not successful for Tutuka. Can you see what I'm saying? So we try to get them also a little proactive. Vision Keepers, and I'm not going to explain all of them. Vision Keepers is for young researchers, young academics, below 45. And we send them anywhere. They choose where they want to go. Anywhere in the world, up to 9 months, to work with a mentor. This is to fast-track the careers of young researchers. Okay, up to 9 months, anywhere in the world, they choose a mentor. But they've got to be clear about what are they going to be working on, and what do they plan to produce and where? Whether it's a manuscript, whether it's publications in high impact factor journals, but they get time out to do that. So at the moment we've got some academics at Oxford, Cambridge, wherever, everywhere else in the world where they choose to be. We also started with the implementation of Vision Keepers 18 months ago. So that's that. I'm going to stop there with all of them, but I've just put them to be around these levels, but it's because it's usually people in that band who are in that age and either and would qualify for these kinds of programs. I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to talk about this, but this is what we try to do with transformation, not just to count professors, but to do things that allow us to set up people for success, and then they can get the professorship, rather than start at the professorship and then say why you're not getting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Phakeng. Now, Professor Jansen.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here this evening. And I also just want to say thank you to the University of Cape Town, to the Dean, the Vice-Chancellor, for encouraging this debate. The reason I mention that is because the responses to transformation and the capacity for transformation depends very much on where you are. Don't you for one moment believe that these issues are the same in the different university traditions which we inherited in our country. So very quickly then, I want to share 10 theses with you. Why 10? Because I've always done 10 on everything. And run through this very quickly. Number one, I think the first thing I want to argue is that transformation, no matter what you think, and I'm saying this particularly to those of you who are in political formations that want it done tomorrow morning, transformation is not a straight line. In practice, it is not a straight line. It is difficult, it is messy, it is costly, and it is sometimes life-threatening. Nobody told me, and I don't mean this, say this lightly, nobody told me that I would receive at least once a month a fairly serious death threat from somewhere in the country, and sometimes out of the country. In fact, just 2 days ago, my colleague came to warn me and sort of say there was a discussion about hoe kan ons die rector vergiftig, which is poison, and so on. Now, that might sound funny to you, it's not funny to me, because I think, and I don't think Max gets those kinds of things, at least not that I know of. But that's very different, because when you have a debate in the English liberal universities, the debates tend to be argumentative. In other words, it tends to be public. You know, you would put up something on your admissions policy on the website, you'd get people together in the Jamison Hall or whatever it's called, and there'd be debates. In the Afrikaans press, it's insult after insult after insult. It is extremely personal. Ask Russell Botman. Ask Dan Gwadi at Northwest University. Sometimes it will kill you, but it is an extremely vindictive and difficult debate with the, aided and abetted, of course, by the Afrikaans press. And one of your colleagues here is one of those who insults time after time using her space that she has in one of the Afrikaans newspapers. That does not help the transformation debate at all. And so I want to applaud you for opening these difficult issues and discussing them and debating it around the ideas as opposed to around the personalities. This is very important if this country is going to appreciate what democracy is about. Second thesis, that transformation is not employment equity. This is very important, and I think in various ways both Hetty and Max made that particular point. It is about a much deeper change in institutions that touches students, curriculum, institutional cultures, symbolism, and of course staff. Transformation, if I may just refer to a guy that I've known since I was a young man here on the Cape Flats. He was a former convict. He had a name called Saul, and then they called him Paul for some reason. And what is very, very interesting is in one of his letters, for those of you who follow the Christian scriptures, he refers to transformation via a word that I like, a Greek word for metamorphosis. And so I like the notion of transformation as meaning something qualitative, something that, in his words, is the result of a changing, or what he calls the changing in the renewal of your minds, as opposed to, as Hetty said, changing heads. That is a very different sense. None of us talk about transformation seriously in that way, and we should. Number three, and let me get to some of the more difficult things. I want to argue that the academic standard against which professorial appointments are made has always been compromised. I can easily prove it to you at your university here. I can prove it to you at the University of Pretoria, where I worked. I can certainly prove it to you at the University of the Free State. And so this is important for us to acknowledge, because very often when we talk about black academics as professors, somebody with varying degrees of loudness would slip in the word standards. And I want to tell you the standards of the historically white universities in South Africa, including UCT, has always been low. Don't let anybody tell you it's always been high. Okay? Don't be misled by... And the only reason we think our standards are high is because we've not been elsewhere. That's the problem. And I've heard it said by some of the eminent professors in this room who work here, and that is true. So South Africans, whether it is, soccer, okay, that's a bad example, or, or academics, we're actually not doing well. You can fool yourself with Scopus and H indices and so on and so forth, but that's not really the measure of greatness of a university. All of us, including this really, really good university called UCT, have a very long way to go in relation to the issue that we so, in a slipshod, use the word standards and so on and so forth. In fact, at my university, when we raised the standards for the professoriate, and this year for the first time we're beginning to see the results of that application, the main impact was on white academics who wanted to become, not on black people, on white academics, because suddenly fewer people got through and fewer people succeeded. And so in all our universities, the standard by which we measure professors is in fact, I think, less than adequate. So don't say standards dropped, okay? Talk about how we can raise standards, especially for the professoriate in all our universities. Number 4, I think we should be honest, particularly those of us who have to work with this every single day. There will not be in the immediate term, by which I mean the next 2 or 3 years, or even in the medium term, by which I mean the next 10 to 15 years, sufficient numbers of black or white professors appointable within South African universities. It's as simple as that. But by professor, I mean scholars. With scholar, let me just use the social sciences and humanities as my frame of reference. By top scholars, I mean those who produce scholarly books from reputable publishers, with path-breaking research published in leading journals of the world, with meaningful research, as you just heard, that changes communities, and with innovative teaching that changes minds and inspires action. There aren't many such professors in South Africa. You fool yourself, black or white. And so how do we begin to develop this seriousness around what we call the professor in our country? But number 5, that even when there are opportunities for appointing more black professors, when we have those opportunities, there are a myriad of rules, written and unwritten, that effectively excludes appointable candidates. One such insidious set of rules is, particularly in the English universities, the so-called cultural fit argument. What does that mean? Let's unpack that a little bit. Because you don't have to use the word race. Use the word cultural fit. In the English university, it has to do with inbuilt prejudices that are disguised in the language of sophistication. They even use that word, sophistication. Particular forms of English language fluency, political acquiescence, social agreeability, connections to the British university establishment, and you're already halfway through the door if you studied in Oxford and Cambridge, and knowledge of the cultural grammar of the English Academy. Now, having had the privilege of studying at universities around the world, I can tell you the top professors, particularly those who come from other parts of the world, Asia, Latin America, and so on. In the North American Academy, they're not fluent at all in English. They stumble and mumble and fall over their own feet but they are treasured precisely because of their scholarship, rather than because of all these things that don't matter. And I can give you very specific examples, but that would be to expose some good friends. In the Afrikaans universities, it's quite different. There it has to do with competence in Afrikaans and the willingness to embrace the language with enthusiasm. In these universities, the public declaration of allegiance to Afrikaans, especially for vice-chancellors, is the single most important factor in determining inclusion or exclusion as a leader. Those people, like my friend Dan Hwadi, are the canaries in the miner's cage, for those of you who know that metaphor. And what that means is, it is an extremely risky proposition, especially in the historically Afrikaans universities. Number 6, that the most damning evidence of wrongdoing when it comes to staffing transformation is the lack of an effective strategy in all our institutions. So don't talk about the little things we are trying to do, and I'm not even going to tell you about all the little things we are trying to do. The question, rather, that should be posed is, why is it that after decades of openness in some of our universities, do we still not see the rise to the top of black professors? We have to ask that question, because the issue is not going to go away by tinkering on the edges of this thing. The issue being raised, and this is deeply felt amongst black professors, and here I want to disagree with somebody I admire greatly in Kolela. I don't think we must force this debate to force us back into our little tribal communities, you know, of black associations and so on. I often turn down, without thinking, any invitation from the black accountants or the black lawyers. I really think this country has come out of that nonsense, and we now need to create a South African identity, and more importantly, a global identity against which we recognize ourselves. But how long can we continue? And I have, and Max has been very tolerant of me, but I've often just sort of said, you know, that this university, which I like so much, really just get rid of referencing people in your medical school admissions by what they look like, you know, and their color and all of that. That debate is over. You can't correct a wrong by drawing on the same language, on the same grammar, of the same categories, you know, that apartheid gave us. You just can't do that. And so we have to find another way in which to speak about ourselves and others. But when we have opportunities to recognize talent from elsewhere, and just remember that this university, as with all the others, including my own, have always excluded people because of what they look like, always. And whether it was Archie Mafeje at UCT or Chabani Manganyi at WITS, it has always happened. And I was very grateful when UCT, and I was here the evening with Max's inauguration, apologize for that. But don't for one moment believe that the behaviors that made that possible also disappeared on that evening. It doesn't. And now something else, and I want to especially speak to my colleagues here who are not vice-chancellors. The real difficulties with staffing transformation actually doesn't lie with Max and me and Gethi. It lies in the academic departments. That is where the power resides. Let me tell you something. No vice-chancellor has the energy, the time, and the resourcefulness to fundamentally change the stakes at this level of appointment. I have been amazed at how, despite our best efforts, I would simply get a document to sign off with that was decided, despite policy, despite everything we've said, despite pleading, despite threatening, and here's the document, jammer professor, ons het al reeds die persoon in kennis gestel. Now, of course, I can make a big fuss, and I do, but don't you think for a moment that in a loosely coupled organization like a university, that you actually have all the power. You don't. Vice-chancellors are pretty useless, I can assure you, when it comes to the real power making. So Bongani in medicine has much more power than Max actually, and changing the stakes there, even though the focus is very much on the leaders at the top. Right, this is where some of you are going to probably leave the room. But the breathless pursuit of international rankings among some of our leading universities undermines the long-term goal of building equity and excellence through sustained investments in younger Black and women scholars. I have just seen this too often to believe it to be otherwise. The thing we are talking about tonight is simply not the most important priority for some university leaders who want quick reputational gains now, rather than the longer-term gains that come through structured, determined, patient investments in Black academics. I normally use the analogy from sport, in particular rugby. And as a Blue Bull supporter, I just want to say to you, I will leave the stage if you mention what happened last Saturday. I have shorter memory loss, fortunately. So. But, you know, this is the Asian strategy. You plan for 40, 50 years. You don't just get a Black rugby player to run onto the field. You actually plan for this. And the question is not what are you doing now. The question is, are the building blocks being set in place at UCT, at UNISA, at Free State, at Pretoria, so that we don't have this debate again a decade or two from now? And on that question, I don't think the answer is very positive. Number 9, almost done, Sakhela. I want to argue that the inherited cultural and political symbolism that continues to, I thought I must use at least one big word so that I look impressive at least tonight, that continues to plasticize. Man, you'll have to talk to me afterwards about that word. South African universities is still largely unexamined in the quest for symbolic reparation. The front page article a couple of days ago in the New York Times by Eve Fairbanks, called The Paradox of Integration, please read it, shows clearly that access in itself does not satisfy in South Africa and in our country the desire of Black students for recognition and staff for recognition and inclusion in former white universities. I was puzzled, for example, just puzzled, that the University of Stellenbosch would bury its first Black rector out of the D.F. Malan Center without any sense of shame. And I was completely puzzled, and I must say perhaps slightly amused, when the new leadership at Rhodes University rushed to announce that the name of the university would not change. Why? Why can't we talk about these things? Have we really become, I don't know, I must impress my medical colleague here, this sort of moral hardening of the arteries, you know? Have we become so incredibly insensitive I mean, our students had just opened a debate on renaming their residence, which is called JBM Herzog, and my goodness me, 4 months afterwards, you could swear that we were asking for something unreasonable. But we've got to take on these debates. It is simply unacceptable that a university has a D.F. Malan Center. Don't we understand where this comes from? It is unacceptable that these things are not put up for debate. And then finally, I want to argue that the longer universities take to deeply transform themselves, the more vulnerable we become to state interference in this important project. And when that happens, the academic project and its transformation ambitions will truly be, as they say in my other language, ingedrang. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. Again, I mean, let's give them another round of applause. As we can see, the issue of transformation is extremely complex, and I think the 3 presentations, very different, from very different vantage points, present that complexity. I don't think there's any easy answers. So in trying to kind of bring this, we now have some time to kind of take some questions from the floor. But I've summarized this into 5 questions, or is it 6? Can you? Yeah, 5, 6 questions. So we're going to put them up on the board, and I'll run through them very quickly, so we can focus the discussion, but not exclude any question. Any question. So let's see. Where is the? Let me run them as we wait for the technology to kick in. The first question that comes up through the presentation is this question of representativity. It doesn't matter from which angle you approach the question of transformation, representativity always comes up as an issue. Is it or is it not important? Is it crucial? How crucial is it for transformation? That's the first question. And the speakers have pronounced themselves differently, or slightly differently, or maybe in the same way on this question. So that's the one. The second question, and again in no particular order, is the question of symbolic changes. Symbolic changes, having the funeral of a black vice-chancellor, the procession leave from the D.F. Malan kind of center or hall. That's one example. At UCT, this is a constant question in recent months. Whether it's about the statue of Rhodes, or the Rhodes Memorial up the mountain looking down upon UCT, or at UCT, or over UCT, and all sorts of other questions. Do they matter? Does it matter? Does symbolism matter, really? Does the renaming of buildings matter? Okay, so that's another question that's kind of flagged here. The third question is the question about one of the speakers said, naming race, talking race, debating race. Are these discussions useful? Are they necessary? Are they constructive? I mean, recently here at UCT, the SRC organized what they called the race dialogue. It was a kind of very intensive and quite intense discussion, a session for over 2 hours, and students were talking about issues of race in very minute but very telling kind of ways, very kind of micro kind of ways. Some students talking about how out of place they feel at UCT, such that to cope and to fit in, some of them have to change their names, you know, so that they can be acceptable, and their difficult names do not stand in the way of them socializing. Political considerations. The question of transformation is preeminently a political issue. At the time of the death of the Vice-Chancellor of Stellenbosch, many people, from different quarters made some suggestions, or rather made reference to the fact that the Vice-Chancellor was under pressure by opponents of transformation, and that in fact he suffered the heart attack as a result of those pressures. So, which are these political circles? Which are these political networks? Which are these political groups that help transformation, and which ones hinder transformation? Those are key questions that, and I think it comes out of the discussions here. Resources. Can you transform a university without additional resources? And additional here means over and above the resources that you require for your day-to-day normal operations. That's a big question. And then finally, how do you prioritize all of these things? And we've had the full list here. Transformation of the curriculum, renaming of buildings, getting black professors, producing PhDs, doing all of these kind of wonderful things. Where do you begin? And most importantly, where do you begin if you are at a former, or rather a kind of African-speaking university, as opposed to an English medium university? And I could throw in here, of course, if you are a University of Zululand, is transformation still an issue for you, where the majority of staff are black at all levels, where the majority of your students are black? Is transformation an issue? Anyway, that's a bag of questions and more that we have before us. So I'm going to invite people from the floor to raise questions. There's a microphone, the microphone's here. Okay, there are microphones available. So let's take hands. If you could please introduce yourself before you speak. And I'm going to move around. I can see there's a hand right up there. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Joshua. I'm from UCT in the School of Economics. I'm an honors student. I have a question for Dr. Price concerning the UCT admissions policy. It seems to me that the admissions policy represents an attempt by the management of UCT to present a story where race is no longer the dominant determinant of privilege in South Africa, even though they know this is not the case. I think that which best illustrates this in the new admissions policy is the home language measure of disadvantage. Dr. Price has said that the reason for this measure is that people who speak a different language to English at home face a kind of linguistic disadvantage, and that's how we have the language measure. However, it seems clear to me that UCT actually uses this measure as a proxy for race, which they don't want to talk about. When asked why UCT does not allow for home language Afrikaans to be counted for disadvantage, which is very bad for colored applicants, Dr. Price has said that including Afrikaans allows too many white Afrikaans students in. So Dr. Price is being disingenuous when he says this is meant to be a measure of linguistic disadvantage, which white Afrikaans students obviously also face. Rather, UCT uses this language variable, as a proxy for race-related disadvantage. They're trying to identify black African students. My question is, why do you need to hide this measure of racial privilege? In doing this, you deny the reality that the majority of this country do face disadvantage because they were discriminated against, because of their race. Okay. Whose interests are we trying to serve by denying the fact that race is still a dominant determinant of disadvantage in South Africa?
Thank you very much. We're going to take 4 questions at a go. So there's another hand down that aisle. Yeah.
I have a question for Dr. Price as well.
Introduce.
Yes, I'm Mr. C.S. Nove. I have a question for Dr. Price. When he was doing his presentation, what he was making rather ambiguous statements when it's coming to defining what transformation is. I have a question, what exactly is transformation? Because he continues referring to transforming society, but we really want to know we're transforming society from what to what exactly? And what is it that we're trying to sort out? And the other problem that I have with Dr. Price in his presentation, he speaks of the availability of equipment and technology to answer challenges affecting society, right? And then he gives examples of poverty and inequality. My question is, since the topic today is about transformation in higher education, the question that I have is, with regards to poverty and inequality, how is UCT fostering, or how is UCT transforming or helping people or the students that are attending UCT from escaping such? And considering that this is a political issue of transformation, if we date back to the reason why we have got problems in our society, it comes from the fact that there is a pre-colonial era, and there's a reason why people were oppressed. And it comes from the fact that certain things were taken from them. And such subjugation came through and independence came by. My question is, if we are going to transform the society without even looking at economic means to transform it, how is the University of Cape Town going to address these issues of economy and poverty? Because certainly the examples that he gives, which is renaming of buildings and everything, they really do not signify transforming students. It's not really significant in transformation in terms of poverty and inequality. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Another indication? Okay, right here.
I'm David Gammon from UCT, from the science faculty. I have a comment and perhaps a question maybe to Professor Jansen in particular, but let me just preface it by saying that one of the frustrations I feel often in some of the discussions around transformation, and perhaps particularly here I refer to the transformation in relation to the professoriate and so on, is that I often feel that people eventually develop sort of caricatures of what the situation is, and one is never really quite sure what the numbers are. So Professor Jansen, you, for instance, referred to the fact that about the very low standards of professors, and by the way, I'm not a professor, so I'm not trying to defend professoriate in particular. But you mentioned that you could point to instances in this university and others. The difficulty with those of us on the ground is that we don't know about those incidents, and it seems that no one is prepared to talk about them openly so that we can try and understand what happened there and perhaps interrogate it. We are forced to accept the word of people like yourself, but I wonder whether it would be better if we developed a way in which we could be a little more open about some of these issues which are clearly quite painful and so on. I think the group of academics at UCT that raised similar questions, it was very general, and one was left wondering, what are they talking about? So that's my point really. Is there any way that we can open this conversation up and be honest with each other so we can interrogate it?
Thank you very much. I do know that some of those black academics are present in this house tonight, so they're most welcome to stand up and clarify and perhaps give us clarification. Okay, Tulan.
My question goes to...
Introduce, please.
My name is Tulane from Social Development here at UCT. My question goes to Kgethi. You mentioned something on rewards that you encourage for transformation. So if you can get more specific, what exactly, and outline maybe those kind of rewards and how they work at your university. Thank you.
Okay, right. I would like to get one more question actually. Okay. 1, 2, this side.
Here we go, here's a mic.
I can't see properly here. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Zogotisani. I'm from the Humanities faculty, and I'm a student representative. My questions entailed with the admissions policy, the incoming, obviously. Since I do not have a PowerPoint, I'm going to just give a brief outline of what it entails.
Slow, Zogo, a little slow.
Sorry?
Slow down a little bit, you speak too fast.
Okay, well, the admissions policy that's coming in is broken up into 3 tiers. The first tier takes in everybody based on, obviously, the academic performance, and that's everybody that meets the standard. The second tier is redress, and the third tier is this group that I may fall into, if you may not share my twang, black middle class. My issue with this policy is just in twofold. First of all, I believe that this policy obstructs the growth of the black middle class. In elaborating on this, I came into UCT at 2012. I matriculated in 2011 from Crawford, Johannesburg. And growing into my third year, I've experienced a lot of people, my peers who came from the same kind of backgrounds, to have either come into UCT on extended degrees or have extended their degrees due to failure. Also, a greater number of them have been excluded from this university. So in terms of this notion of black students being on par with white students because of their educational background is completely rubbish. So my question is really just to speak to about why are we separating the distinguishment of black? Because if you look at this black middle class, the third tier, who are not given the privilege of getting into the university, who are probably going to be your honor students, who are probably going to be the competitive working black group that grows this middle class, why are we now segregating and structuring what black is? Because by segregating the two, can I just finish? Thank you. By segregating what black is, you are now putting a disadvantage to this black middle class. And what you're doing, obviously, sure enough, you're pushing up the Regis category, but you're also not helping the throughput of the university. The university obviously sees that people with more Western educational backgrounds get to honors level, they become more competitive in the working field. So therefore, why are we not sticking to the old admissions policy, which just saw black as black, because that's how we feel it should be? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zugo. Pass it down to the back, just before you, behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, Russell Davies from REAP, the Rural Education Access Program. My interest is how transformation can work for a transformed student population. So I guess I didn't hear much about teaching. I'm just interested as to how that factors into this whole debate, the capacity of a university to adequately prepare an increasingly transformed student demographic for graduation, for the world of work. When we're considering the academics we choose, are we looking at their ability to teach as well as produce research? Yeah. And I guess that transformation from universities as not just research institutions, but as teaching institutions.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to let the panel respond. You don't have to respond to all of them, and some of them were very specific questions. I'm also, we as UCT people, I mean, some of the questions are very UCT specific, are very, very specific. And I don't want the debate to get too bogged down in UCT specific questions, but at the same time, I want us to open it up. So Max, you'll use your discussion on how you handle those questions. Perhaps we should start with Jonathan this time, reverse the order. Yeah. There's a...
let me just go to the colleague there from the science faculty. The first thing I just want to say is it's extremely difficult to, I'll do that with you privately, it's extremely difficult to do that in a big audience, in part because there are people's reputations at stake and so on. But I did stick my neck out on some historical examples like Archimafeji and Chabani Mangani and Ezekiel, Eskia and Pashlele, and I can go on and on and on and on. So those examples are there, and those things are known by most people who work in higher education. I would say just take a good look inside, and again, I don't think this debate is about UCT at all, I agree. This is about all our institutions. Just go and look at the appointment, take your 5 most productive universities in South Africa in terms of research, and just go and look at the appointment of deans across and tell me those are the top scholars in the world. It's not. I mean, you just go and do a quick check. So ask yourself about the people who left here at this university or at my university who were, top black scholars. Ask yourself how many people who left South African universities, among the top universities, immediately were regarded as outstanding academics in North America, for example. Again, don't force me to mention names here, but I think everybody here who just opens their ears would understand that this is a systemic problem, it is a cross-institutional problem, and it is something that we have not, but don't let anybody tell you, and this is the main point I wanted to make with that point, don't let anybody tell you that we've always had high standards and suddenly they're dropping because of the kinds of people showing up in our institutions. That is not true. I want to, with the chair's permission, take a little bit of a stab at the issue of admissions to medical school. We have a medical school, and I can tell you now, I wish we can only take 140 students, and we have about 3,500 applications this year for next year. I wish, where's my friend John Higgins? I wish, John, there was the same angst amongst parents for the BA Humanities degree as it was for the MBCHB. My God, people sort of tell you that since the day this kid was born, he wanted to become a doctor. I find that really fascinating from a biographical point of view. But there is this huge angst around admission, particularly medical school. Let me tell you something. The real measure, and let me use medical school as an example, and let me speak here as a person who grew up here in Cape Town. The real measure of UCT success is not the black kid that comes in here from Saks. I'm sorry. The real measure of your success is the extent to which a kid from Khayelitsha, Nyanga, and Mitchell's Plain gets in here. That's what universities are for, to give the kids who have the least chance the best opportunity to get into one of our top universities.
Thank you.
All right, Tulani, when I talk about rewards, I'm talking about the research allocation funds that we give to faculties. That in the algorithm that we use, we include a variable for transformation. Okay, and I'm arguing that the DHED actually, in giving us subsidy for our publications, if they wanted to drive transformation seriously, I think they should do that. They should look at who's publishing and reward universities for that as well. We can do that for student throughputs as well. Not only give subsidy for the number of students who are graduating, but also look at who are these students in an effort to drive to make universities focus on increasing that, because there's something about subsidies that drive a particular kind of behavior from the lowest levels, that academics suddenly decide to publish here and not elsewhere, simply because they'll be getting funding from publishing in one journal or the other. And some prestigious journals are not on the list, and so they will not publish on them, some of them, you know. So I'm arguing that reward, that's what I'm talking about. And once you do that, I mean, heads of departments start thinking about who do they hire, what kinds of programs do they encourage their staff to take up? What kinds of activities do they do to help people, to make sure that people get to the level where they can do research, produce outputs, because that will benefit the department as well.
Thanks, Max. You use your discussion. Some of them are long kind of debates that we here internally at UCT can engage in. Use your discussion. But
you're sending me a very clear message not to take a long time. And I shall watch you, and as soon as you say time, I shall stop. I'll start with what I think are the shorter questions, not necessarily addressed to me. Dave Gammon asked, and Prof. Jansen talked about standards being low and needing to be raised. And I want to agree with him, but also to put an angle on that. I think that standards have increased over the years, and I certainly think they have at UCT become much more systematized, standardized across faculties, although with variation, and higher than they were. And that reflects the change in what was required. It did not used to be the case 30 years ago that you had to have a PhD to become a senior lecturer, whereas today, by and large, that is the case. In that sense, the standards have increased. Before, I think there was a much more subjective approach to promotion committees. It used to be said, for example, that it was more difficult to be promoted to an associate professor than to be appointed as a full professor in a chair. And that was the case because the standards were different, so you could often have someone appointed as a full professor in a chair who had a certain kind of experience, but not necessarily very scholarly. It's certainly the case that, for example, in appointing deans, DVCs, and vice-chancellors, that we look for different qualities. And so that shouldn't be, I think, the yardstick for full professorship. I think it's important, though, so I want to also present a different caution, which is not that standards are too low, but that when people make comparisons, they should take account of changing cohorts over time and recognize that it's not appropriate to look at someone who was promoted or appointed 10 or 15 years ago, unless you want to apply some standards to some people which were from 10 years ago and other standards to people from today. This word standards, let's call it criteria. I know it is a swear word, and we have to, and I don't want it to become, to be misinterpreted. I think what we need is the transparency in those selection committees and in those promotion committees, so that people can, if there is a mistrust, as I think there is, that it can be established, whether it's through representation from elected member representatives or from employment equity representatives or others.
Okay.
We need to re-establish that. Teaching and learning was raised as a question, and I certainly think that, and it's a harder fight at UCT than it may be at some other universities, that we should be doing much more to valorize teaching, and that there should be teaching career tracks, and that it should be possible to get substantial promotion to senior levels, provided there is also scholarship of teaching. That's a battle that I think we have to fight in a university that sees itself first and foremost as a research university, but it's necessary if we're going to address the quality of teaching and teaching the broader diversity of students. On the question that was asked, what is transformation of society? Is UCT really doing transformation? I thought I had addressed it, so I'll just pick out 2 points which are a bit of a repetition. How do we help students escape poverty was the question. Well, we do it in 2 ways. First, we go into schools, Khayelitsha schools. We bring students onto campus every Saturday. We pay for the buses. We employ teachers. We give them access to our science labs and our math and our computer labs. We bring them onto, during the holidays for summer and winter camps, into our residences. These are students who would have no opportunity, and there were almost none coming into UCT from Khayelitsha. Now we have about 70 a year. That is through an outreach program which tries to bring people out of poverty. And then on the other side, when they graduate, they of course have opportunities. And then at a policy level, we work with the Treasury, we work with the National Development Plan, we work with, we have a major program on poverty and inequality, which we think, and the Treasury thinks, and the NDP thinks makes a difference because they fund those programs very generously. So I think we certainly see our role as in transforming society as well as the university. Now, the last questions were about the admissions policy, and as you say, those are long debates.
Right.
There was a long discussion about Afrikaans, and our experience is that most students, white students who speak Afrikaans as a home language, also speak English very fluently. It is rare that they would be significantly disadvantaged in learning at school. That is not the case for many people who speak other South African languages as a home language. So it is something that we can't simply use as a marker of disadvantage. We have to find other ways of doing it. And the question of, are we trying to exclude middle-class black students, and has the policy changed in a way that does that? And the answer is certainly no. I'm absolutely with Professor Jansen in saying that the measure of a university's transformation is the extent to which it is able to recruit students from seriously disadvantaged schools and from townships, not the measure to which it simply recruits relatively privileged middle-class black students. But that is not to say we don't want those students. The reason we've been able to change the policy is because those students are getting in without any affirmative action. They're performing well, they are competitive, and they don't need the leg up that the old policy gave them. To the extent that they do, as those of you who know the policy, you will know that we're not moving away from race, or we've not abandoned race. Race is certainly one of the criteria to ensure that our demographic targets are achieved.
Thanks very much. I just want to, I would like people in the audience to walk out of this with something, carrying something. And there's one part which I think is missing in the discussion, and I want to pose a direct question to the three panelists now. If you were to put transformation plans or strategies of all the different universities, certainly the three that are before us here, you know, very good intentions, very noble kind of objectives. On paper, it looks, all of them look good. And I don't think that's where the issue is. The problem is, why is it that the shadow of the past continues to hang so heavily over the present? What is the difficulty? Where is the difficulty? Jonathan, you alluded to it to some extent, that you can take all these kind of good positions at the top, but the trouble is going to be in departments. But what's the problem? Why can't you fix it? Where is the problem? I think that the real frustration with members of the university community generally, and I imagine not only here at UCT but in other places, is that at the top, management speaks the language that everyone would like to hear. language of transformation. The goals are laudable, they are there. The targets are often there too. But when the job has got to be done, we've got very little to show. I accept that the numbers are not there in many cases. I accept Jonathan's point. It will take a long time to build those numbers, sufficient numbers. But just to change basic things.
I think,
yeah, go for it.
I think it's because it's easy to put a plan down, and plans are required by other officers and you submit to them. But I think the reason why sometimes you don't see the changes on the ground is because at the level of implementation, transformation is seen as being against white people. White people see it as being against them. Okay? And in some places, the problem, in fact, is that the people who are supposed to do it are white people themselves. So it's sort of they have to work against themselves. You know, and I'm you know, being deliberately provocative here.
Right.
Because I think that's what it is. And I think I hear Jonathan who says, you know, we've got to all be the same. Don't use categories of the past and so on and so forth. I mean, it's just 20 years. Are you wanting me to believe that that never happens? That the past never happened in the way that it is? I mean, I'm very conscious. I'm very conscious of the fact that despite what I have achieved, my peers who are my age had a different life to mine. And there are things, I mean, when I moved from Unibo to Vets, I mean, there's a whole culture shock that happened when I was doing honors. And it took me 6 months to say anything in class. Because you just don't know. You raise your hands. People don't raise their hands. They wait for a pause and they come in. You know, so you... exactly. I mean, it's a simple thing, but it's very powerful, you know. It's, you take... for you, that's not done. And you take a whole year to learn when the pause happens. And then you... I mean, now I'm corrupted. I do it routinely, you know. But people who haven't experienced that, they don't think something that looks so minor is actually very major, because what it means is that you don't actually participate in the proceedings of the class. And if you don't participate, what you get out of it and what you get into it, it's very little. You know, so you're spectating most of the time. What are you learning? You know, and poverty works in different ways, you know, I think. I mean,
okay.
Yeah. But
yes, but the people who are keeping the time are kind of reminding me that we have to wrap up soon. Yeah. But Jonathan and Max, I want to hear you on this.
I disagree with Getty. I think if we think we can get out of apartheid by appealing to apartheid's categories, we're mad. You don't understand how race works. This gives you the Jimmy Monies of this world. The logical conclusion of doing what was done to us gives you Jimmy Money and that kind of overpopulation of colored people, that kind of nonsense, okay? So I think
so should we have race categories on our admission forms?
I think we all know, all three of us here know our historic responsibility, I trust. And that is to make sure that people who've been disadvantaged from the past must get access and enjoy success. We know that, you know? And I know that that is my responsibility. Here's the reason why it doesn't change. Let me answer you very quickly. Because we're trapped in our tribalism, black people tend to hire black people. English people tend to hire English people. I can prove that to you. Afrikaans people tend to hire Afrikaans people. It's just the way we have been influenced by this past. Our responsibility as leaders is not to think like that. Our responsibility as leaders is to be generous, even as we recognize. So I'll hire the best black or white person who ever shows up, but I know I have a responsibility to make sure that if the theoretical basis of this is a book. Sorry, I'm a professor, so I must give you a reading. Right. Not you, some of the students. There's a book called Hot Thoughts. It's not what you think. And it's a book by an electrical engineering professor at MIT who actually shows even your most innocent choices and decisions are driven by emotions that are very deeply seated. So what is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to go against that, right? And here's the difficulty. Hetty can pull a number of things, and I was listening to a fascinating presentation, that I can't pull in the same way, okay? And you've got to recognize that. And yet I have to, because if we don't do that, we'll have the same debate in 10 years' time, and I'm not prepared to come here again for that purpose.
Thank you.
Well, I think that that shadow you're talking about is a different shadow in different places, as we're hearing. In this institution, I think it is what we've come to call the institutional culture. And I think that, in a sense, representativity will drive the change in institutional culture as well. And so representativity does become not just a component of transformation, but a driver of transformation and a driver of change. And the article that that Jonathan referred to by E. Fairbanks also is an interesting story about the Free State and elsewhere, that as representativity increases, the pushback is likely to increase, because whereas in the beginning the hegemonic culture is unthreatened and doesn't have to change, at a certain point it has to change. And I think we at UCT are at that point, and we are needing to understand that what many of us, particularly white, take for granted and take as second nature and think this is the way the world is not the way the world is, and that there are many ways the world can be, and that we have to let go of that. And so what can be done, I think, is very much actually from political will and political leadership from the top. I think we have to get it at all levels, but I think that it depends significantly on the leadership.
Thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big round of applause. Just a few closing remarks. It's a pity our time is short, but you can interact with them outside. Just to thank a few people. First, the speakers. Jonathan had to come all the way from the Free State, not to mention Khetty, who came 2 hours, down the way from Pretoria. And of course, Max came all the way from Bremner Building. And thanks so much for them and for spending their time sharing the ideas. This is not the end of the debate, only the beginning. And hopefully the Sunday Times will pick up some of the ideas here. The second set of people to thank are the audience themselves. Thanks very much for showing up, and we hope to come next time. You'll come next time. The Sunday Times, of course, thanks very much for partnering with us. And then finally, staff. Some people have done an excellent job of organizing all of these things here. Staff in the faculty office, Lebo, Carla, and then of course, Gillian. Where's Gillian? Gillian from the College of Music pulled a few strings to get us into this room. Just like that. And of course, many other people who have helped make this a success. Thanks very much, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. One speaker has already been confirmed, and that is Kolela. Thanks very much. Okay.